So salute to America. And I'm going to be here, and I'm going to say a few words, and we're going to have planes going overhead, the best fighter jets in the world, and other planes too. And we're going to have some tanks stationed outside. Got to be pretty careful with the tanks because the roads have a tendency not to like to carry heavy tanks, so we have to put them in certain areas. But we have the brand new Sherman tanks, so we have the brand new Abram tanks.
Several tanks rolled into Washington overnight in preparation for President Trump's July 4th event. They were on the back of trucks. Despite claims the celebration will be nonpartisan, as it's been in years past, Democratic lawmakers may have to stake out spots for the event hours in advance, considering they've not received any tickets to the event so far. Republicans, however, including RNC donors and Trump's re-election campaign, have been granted access to a VIP area near the Lincoln Memorial. Here's how the White House justifies that.
Why is the Republican National Committee giving out tickets to supporters of the president? Why are those going?
This is a public event. It's open to the public. The public is welcome to come and celebrate our great country, the greatest democracy. I'm not going to allow you to politicize it.
The National Park Service is diverting nearly $2.5 million in fees meant to improve parks across the United States to help cover costs associated with the Independence Day event. That's according to the Washington Post. Joining us now, U.S. Navy veteran and member of the Armed Services Committee, Democratic Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill of New Jersey. Congresswoman, great to see you this morning.
Thanks so much for having me.
Welcome back home to Jersey, by the way.
I'm loving it.
So I want to get to the important work you're doing on election security in just a moment. But first, as someone who has served, what's your reaction to this idea of tanks and planes rolling into Washington for the 4th of July?
You know, I think a lot of people are arguing over whether or not we should have the tanks and the planes, but something no one's arguing over is that our 4th of July celebrations on the Mall should be nonpartisan.
Yeah.
This should be a celebration of our country. And so I've been telling everybody, if they're not pleased with the partisan nature of Washington, to come to Parsippany. We had a Bruce Springsteen cover band last year. It's going to be awesome. So you're welcome there.
So the answer is come to Parsippany.
The answer is Parsippany. The answer is Parsippany.
Will there be tanks in Parsippany? I guess is my question.
There will not.
Well, I think
there will be blankets, beach blankets.
Yeah, watching the fireworks. I think you're right that nobody objects to a celebration of the military and the troops and our veterans,
certainly,
like yourself. It is the idea, though, that President Trump may get up there at the Lincoln Memorial and drop into some kind of a campaign speech. Do you have that concern?
You know, that would be an unfortunate miss of an opportunity to, again, unite the country, to really, bring people together in a celebration of our democracy, of our values, of our country. And so I really hope that that is not what the president uses the 4th for.
I said yesterday, he did do it at the D-Day celebration. He gave a speech that was not political, so perhaps, Karine, he can pull it off again tomorrow.
Oh,
fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, considering no Democrats were giving tickets to this event. My question to you, Congresswoman, is as a U.S. Navy veteran, what message is this parade tomorrow sending to our troops out there and to veterans? Like, what does this say when they see this? What do they think about this, you think?
You know, I think that they probably are used to tanks and planes, and we go to a lot of air shows. We just had a beautiful air show and paratroopers in Normandy to celebrate that. So I think that probably people will regard it in different ways. Some people think that's a nice celebration. Some people probably think there's better ways to celebrate and to use taxpayer money, as we're always worried about in New Jersey. But again, I think what nobody will disagree about is that this is a time to bring people together. This is a time to celebrate all Americans and to celebrate what makes us unique as Americans, and I hope we can do that.
To my mind, the July 4th has always been about the idea of America, not so much about our military strength. And so to put forward the idea that we're the superpower in the world, as opposed to the power of the American idea of democracy, suggests a shift. But what do you make of this shift, that to pay for it, $2.5 million from parks and recreation fees that are used to keep up our parks will be diverted to pay for this spectacle, which seems to be a political rally? What do you make of that?
Well, again, if it's a political rally, I don't think anybody will disagree that that is a poor use of funds. That, you know, that it is to be used for funds to celebrate our country. I've long watched the celebration on TV, you know, to see the bands play and the Marine Corps band play and the fireworks go off, and really felt a sense of pride in our country. And that's what we want Americans to feel, is that this is our country and we share that together. So to use it, you know, to divide people, if that's the case, I think would be a really poor use of our money. I'm really hoping, though, as you mentioned, Willie, you know, at Normandy, the president did bring people together. And I think that was well received. And I think that's what we want to see again. So I'm hoping that's what we see.
I hope so too. Let's talk about the work you're doing with Task Force Sentry, which is to help protect American elections in a way they weren't protected in 2016 and frankly in 2018. You have a group of 6 Democrats, and you did get 1 Republican to work with you on this. What exactly are you doing specifically to help protect our elections?
So we have been for many weeks now really looking into exactly what happened, how the Russians hacked into our democracy, how they instigated people into protest, how they influenced chat rooms. You know, we saw with the Mueller report some of what they used to influence our election system. And the thing that I think caught our attention is many of us, having worked in national security, I was a Russian policy officer, we have seen this type of attack on other democracies. And so to have it here at home was particularly offensive and particularly concerning. We had, I think, assumed that there would be some legislation in planning, and we'd not seen that. And when the news came out that, for me, that the Secretary of Homeland Security had attempted to go to the president to plan to protect the 2020 elections and was not able to do so, I thought, you know, now it's time that Congress really step up and do this. And the national security expertise, the foreign policy expertise in many ways resides in the freshman class right now.
So what exactly does this do that's not being done in other pieces of the Congress?
So I think other parts of the Congress are looking carefully at how we protect our elections at registration and at the ballot box. As you may know, New Jersey is one of the few states without paper ballots, which is critical. So we've provided some money from Congress to protect the elections in that way, in the registration process at the ballot box. But what we need to do is take a broader look at how Russians are using what I would call psyops to influence the elections, and that is making sure that when people are in chat rooms, they know if they're talking to someone from Persephone or from Moscow, or if they're going to a protest, they know if that protest has been organized by people in their local community, their neighborhood, along the values and ideals they want to protest, or if that's something that the Russians have particularly instigated to divide us in this country. And that's what we're looking into.
Which they did in 2016. A lot of these groups were organized by Russians. Congresswoman Kristen Soltis Anderson's in Washington with a question for you.
Congresswoman, when you talk about trying to make it more possible for people out there who are news consumers, they want to be active participants in their democracy, they're getting information via Facebook, different social media sites, what specifically would your legislation do that would flag for them or would require these tech companies to take action or assist these tech companies in taking action to say, hey, this person you're talking to who you think is voter Mike Smith, who might live in your community, is actually just a dummy account being run by a teenager in a bot farm somewhere? How would your legislation specifically help people identify what is real and what is fake online?
Well, I think that's the key, is identifying where information is coming from. So having our tech companies ensure that when you receive information that you can identify where that information is coming from. Making sure that when you go into a chat room, it's identified if that person is from Russia or if that person is from a foreign country. And we have some FEC regulations regarding foreign influence into our election system, Federal Election Commission regulations. So we can transfer some of those to the tech companies, and that's kind of a new area. We want to make sure that we're telling the American people where information is coming from, while I think not regulating content, because we do have free speech implications. We want people to have that. But I tell people, if you're getting your information from RT, you should know that's Russian propaganda and Russian influence on some level. If you're getting information from Sputnik, you should realize that that's not just like MSNBC or Fox or CNN. That is Russian television, and that is a foreign power influencing how people in this country think.
All right, Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill doing important work on our elections and important Chamber of Commerce work for Parsippany this afternoon.
I'll tell Mayor Soriano is going to be really pleased with me.
We'll see you with our blankets tomorrow in Parsippany. Thanks, Congresswoman.
Thank you.
Good to
Thanks
see
so
you.
much.
The
Thank
must-read opinion pages are ahead, including one that offers the one way Democrats can defeat Donald Trump. Morning Joe's back in a moment.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.